Hello, BookTube, and welcome to another fiction review. Would you believe it? A week ago, Thursday, 21st of March, it was the first birthday of the Heather Reads channel. Yeah, my own first birthday just kind of crept up on me. As soon as I realized, I opened up YouTube Studio and I just started scrolling through my contents page, trying to make the last year seem what it was. It doesn't really seem real. I feel a bit like the author of the book that we're going to review today when he said, I can't altogether believe that any of this has really happened. So I definitely need to produce content for another year and see if that's what it takes to make the reality sink in. The book we're going to review today is Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood, first published in 1939, but the vintage Random House paperback that I read came out in 1998. Let's try to pitch this book. Think of an old-fashioned photo album. Okay, does everyone know what I'm talking about? I am talking about those bulky books that used to be bought in the pre-digital, pre-history. If you don't own any, you might have an older relative who does. These were volumes where snapshots, physical pieces of paper with photographs on them, were stuck to the pages like scrapbooks in an attempt to capture the past, so it could be reviewed, maybe relived if a picture happened to revive a memory. Or if you were a family with a little more money, you might have been able to make home movies. But what I'm trying to say is this 20th century experience of being able to consult images which were captured in the moment they happened is unique, absolutely unique. And we often regard it as the closest that we can get to an objective viewpoint, although that could be another discussion entirely if we let it. Christopher Isherwood joined the newly formed Film Society at Cambridge University in 1924, and his Berlin writings are a self-confessed attempt to use language in a way which will leave the reader with the impression of being presented with still and moving camera images which show places and people and record what they say. And yet it is also based, to some degree or another, on the lived experience of the author and of the narrator which has been given his name. And so you have a piece of writing which is hybrid. It is part television documentary, part diary, and part novel. Okay, let's do all the mundane details. How long is the book? How much did it cost? Where did I get it, etc. My vintage paperback version was 245 pages long. Now the font was densely packed, but it was large. It had to be at least 14 point. I can't precisely date when I bought it, but I can say it had to be after August 2018, because that's when the company that I work for moved offices from one side of town to the other. And of course, it completely changed my shopping habits. I went to a different supermarket, and it was at that supermarket that they had a secondhand book exchange table to raise funds for various charities. That's where I got this book, and I paid an extravagant sum. I paid an entire pound sterling. Now, my copy clearly came from a library at one time. I've got to show you this. I photographed the spine just so that you can see the sticker there with the barcode for scanning and the index number for correct shelving. And it was either borrowed or owned by some fastidious person whose attention was drawn to the typing and spelling errors in the text, which they underlined. And sometimes they suggested corrections in the margin notes. However, their corrections weren't always correct, which I found very amusing. I have never done a video giving my opinion about annotations, but I'll state it right now. I love them. I absolutely love them. I love to annotate books, and I love to discover annotations in books. We have BookTube now, but it used to be the only way that you could connect with someone who was just as interested in the same book as you were, was by reading, if they left markings and notes in your secondhand copy. So this is where we give a short biography of the author, but bear in mind, a short biography of Christopher Isherwood is going to be an inadequate one. While I was researching for this review, I made a wonderful discovery. I discovered that Catherine Bucknell, who has the rights to edit Isherwood's letters and diaries, and she also has unlimited access to speak with his partner, Don Bacardi. She has just finished a new biography, and it's due out in June. And this is the cover. It's called Inside Out. I recommend reading that. I definitely want to, and I'm going to include a link to the Amazon page in my description box. The Isherwood family were landed English gentry who'd been established in the Northwest, going back to the 17th century. Christopher was born in 1904. We don't know a great deal about his childhood, except that his father died in 1915 fighting with his Lancashire regiment at Ypres. Naturally, a young man of Christopher's class was expected to go to university and get a degree. Isherwood did attend Cambridge for a year, but he was asked to leave because he filled his second year examination paper with jokes and limericks. There was a second attempt to begin a degree in medicine at King's College London, but that ended after 6 months. Significantly, Isherwood's first novel, All the Conspirators, was published around this time, and it deals with, guess what, the conflict between parents and children over questions of self-determination. Well, that's telling. In March 1929, Isherwood traveled to Berlin. He went there to meet his friend, the poet W. H. Auden. He chose the city because it was going to give him the opportunity to explore his sexuality. He visited Magnus Herschfeld's Institute of Sexual Research. Now, that's a piece of lost history which needs to get more attention, but I'll talk about that later. He left Berlin in 1933, but the diaries and the other writings that he had kept during that time will provide the material for this novel. Isherwood eventually settled in the United States, in California. He wrote 15 novels and a number of film scripts. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he died from that illness in 1986, aged 81. Setting. Well, because it goes hand in hand with any discussion about setting, I want to talk about the cover art that is often created for reprint editions of Goodbye to Berlin, and I created this collage to make a point. You might know that Goodbye to Berlin was the inspiration for the stage musical and the film Cabaret. However, if you believe that this novel is mainly about the adventurous nightlife in Berlin, then that would be an unfortunate distortion of the actual content. There are scenes which take place in bars and clubs, but these are few, and their appearance is incidental. That is, the book is not about those places or about the people who work in them or go to them. The vast majority of scenes are domestic. They're in houses or apartments or rented rooms in different neighborhoods. Isherwood is he's going across all socioeconomic classes. He's painting a really sort of broad sketch of the city, and he's documenting the struggles of different groups of people, the middle class and the working classes in particular, as they try to maintain their standard of living in the period after the hyperinflation crisis. And it's true that the book also has some queer characters and a couple of stories in which their personal struggles combine with the economic and political background that I spoke of earlier. But you have to take it as a whole. The book is really quite a diverse portrait of Berlin, captured in a very small time period between 1930 and 1933, that transitional point in Germany's history at the end of which the National Socialist Party is in power and Adolf Hitler is chancellor. Okay, let's talk about the narrative viewpoint and the narrative voice. In my edition, there's a short foreword written by Isherwood in which he says, quote, "Because I have given my own name to the I of this narrative, readers are certainly not entitled to assume that its pages are purely autobiographical or that its characters are libelously exact portraits of living persons. Christopher Isherwood is a convenient ventriloquist dummy, nothing more." So, this first-person narrator, who happens to be called Christopher Isherwood, also informs us from the opening page of what they aim to do with the writing. They say, "I am a camera with its shutter open, quite passive, recording, not thinking, recording the man shaving at the window opposite and the woman in the kimono washing her hair." And this Isherwood, perhaps because he is supposed to be just a mouthpiece, he observes and records incidents which ought to have had some emotional impact on him. But he rarely records a reaction. When he does express his emotions, he seems insecure about his place in the world, and he expresses a restlessness that I have noticed before in the inner monologues of other gay male characters appearing in books which are set before 1970. And I'd like to just read three extracts to show this. The first one will be this book, Goodbye to Berlin. It's Christopher speaking on page 14, where he says, "How many seas and frontiers shall I have to cross to reach that distant day? How far shall I have to travel on foot, on horseback, by car, push bike, aeroplane, steamer, train, lift, moving staircase, and tram?" Compare that with this passage from James Baldwin's novel Giovanni's Room, and this is David speaking. "I had decided to allow no room in the universe for something which shamed and frightened me. I succeeded very well by not looking at the universe, by not looking at myself, by remaining, in effect, in constant motion. If I had had any intimation that the self I was going to find would turn out to be only the same self from which I had spent so much time in flight, I would have stayed at home." And then there is this line from Matt Crowley's play, The Boys in the Band. Michael is speaking. "You think it's just nifty how I've always flitted from Beverly Hills to Rome to Acapulco to Amsterdam, picking up a lot of one-night stands and a lot of custom-made duds along the trail. But I'm here to tell you that the only place in all those miles, the only place I've ever been happy, was on the goddamn plane. Run, charge, run, buy, borrow, make, spend, run, squander, beg, run, run, run." You can see the similarity in those three quotes. And in Goodbye to Berlin, this restlessness is juxtaposed by the other residents of Berlin who, in one way or another, are either trapped by their poverty or disability or their sense of obligation or duty. And as the political climate changes in Germany, you just wonder how these people are going to cope and how they did cope, if any of them were based on real people that Isherwood met. Goodbye to Berlin, though it might not seem it, is genre fiction. It is what is called autobiographical fiction, a genre which allows the author to use their life experiences on the understanding that what you read is not an autobiography. Speaking personally, I really don't know what that means in practice. It would be naive to assume that autobiographies are completely accurate or that they even intend to be accurate. And it makes no sense to produce autobiographical fiction which contains very little or no truth about the author, because that would just be plain ordinary fiction, wouldn't it? But I suppose a novel that lets you know that it contains autobiographical material, well, you might give it more credibility than just ordinary fiction. And also, possibly, the form may have been a means of self-protection for Isherwood. He could use fiction to address issues which were taboo, but he could also, have that as a barrier, the autobiographical fiction genre, to maintain his privacy. His narrator does not come out as gay unless you count a very brief exchange with some young Americans outside the Salome nightclub, where Isherwood and his friend Fritz, they describe themselves as queer, but they're relying on the alternative meanings to cause some confusion for the Americans and thereby keep the tension outside the club from escalating. You will find some problematic content in the book. There is a character who undergoes a secret abortion, probably illegal. The expertise of the doctor is suspect, and so there's always the danger there. And there's also a number of descriptions, as you might imagine, of anti-Semitic violence and threat. A number of characters have Nazi sympathies, or they harbor anti-Semitic prejudice anyway, which the rise of the Nazis just encourages. So you're going to have hate speech. And finally, any suggestions for related or follow-up reading? Well, this is going to be a plea for new writing, quite different. Isherwood went to Berlin because W.H. Auden told him about the city's tolerance for its queer demi-monde. I want to return to my earlier mention of Magnus Herschfeld and the Institute of Sexual Research, which would be 100 years old today if it hadn't been raided and closed down by the National Socialist government in 1933. The work the Institute was trying to do was 100 years ahead of its time. I will leave a link to the Scientific American article titled "The Forgotten History of the World's First Trans Clinic," which relates the institution's history and Hirschfeld's efforts to raise awareness and acceptance for greater variation in sexual and gender expression. Sadly, most of the books that are available about Hirschfeld and his work, they're still only available in the original German. Those that have been translated or written in English, they're often out of print or they're academic works, and you know the kind of price tags you get on academic books. So if anyone is aware of a well-researched book that is being written right now and will be, aimed at a broader audience, I'd very much like to know. Okay, one video done, one more to do, and then it's April already. Cool. One quarter of 2024 done, and I'm approaching the halfway point in my Read What I Own challenge. I am going to be doing a collaboration this week with David at Polyglot Reader. We're going to do a close reading of the short story White Rabbits by Leonora Carrington. You're going to enjoy that. If you've read Carrington's novel, The Hearing Trumpet, but even if you haven't, this is going to be an ideal opportunity for you to get acquainted with Carrington's fabulously imaginative but also bizarre and sometimes macabre writing. I hope you'll join us then. In the meantime, happy reading. Take care. Bye-bye.